This is Stephen Olson, and this is my presentation on monetary policy and aggregate demand. The Federal Reserve, or the Fed, is the central banking system of the United States and was established in 1913. Its purpose is to regulate the money supply, be it increasing it or decreasing it, and thus regulating interest rates, all through the use of several different monetary policies. The first of these monetary policies, and the most widely used, is open market operations. This is when the Federal Reserve buys securities from smaller banks or sells securities to the smaller banks around the country. Securities include bonds, treasury notes, and treasury bills. Treasury bills are the short-term federal security. They are sold in terms ranging from a few days to 52 weeks and are marked down from par price when you buy them. If you buy a $1,000 bond, it may be marked down to $950, and at the end of the term, it could be sold for its true value due to gains from interest. Treasury notes are the medium-time form of federal securities. They earn a fixed rate of interest every 6 months in periods of 2, 3, 5, 7, and 10 years. Like Treasury bills, you can sell Treasury notes before or when they mature. Treasury bonds are the long-term investment of federal securities. Similar to Treasury notes, bonds pay a fixed rate of interest every 6 months but mature in 30 years. Like notes and bills, bonds too can be sold before they mature for less of a profit, or once they mature. These three types of securities can be used for two types of policies: expansionary monetary policy and contractionary monetary policy. Expansionary monetary policy is when the central bank buys securities from smaller banks. Contractionary monetary policy is when the central bank sells securities to smaller banks. Both of these policies have their own different positive and negative effects on the money supply in the economy. This graph displays the effect of implementing an expansionary monetary policy through the use of open market operations. Because the central bank is buying securities from smaller banks, it gives those smaller banks more money. The new funds acquired by the smaller banks can be used as loans to individuals and businesses. The more money that is available in the market for lending, the lower the interest rates will become. This can be seen as a shift in the money supply curve to the right. Again, a positive result, which is a decrease in interest rates. Open market operations can also have negative impacts. This graph displays the effect of implementing a contractionary monetary policy. Because the Federal Open Market Committee is selling securities to banks, it decreases the available funds of those banks. This means that the amount of money available to loan to individuals and businesses has decreased, resulting in an increase in its interest rates. This can be seen in the graph as a leftward shift, an increase in interest rates, and a negative impact on the economy. Open market operations also have impacts on the aggregate demand curve of the economy. When the central bank buys securities, it is increasing the money supply in the economy. With more money in the system, investment will increase, consumption will increase, and government spending will immediately increase because of the acquisitions of the securities. All of these aspects make up GDP. And if they all increase, GDP will increase. Aggregate demand represents all of the components of GDP, so when GDP increases, so does aggregate demand. Open market operations can also have negative impacts on aggregate demand. When the Fed sells securities, the money supply decreases, resulting in less money in the system. This results in a decrease of consumption and a decrease in investment. Again, because these aspects are part of GDP and GDP is decreasing, aggregate demand will also decrease. This can be seen on the graph as a shift to the left of the AD curve. The second tool that the Fed can use as part of monetary policy is the discount rate. The discount rate is the interest rate given to smaller banks when the Federal Reserve or central bank loans them money. Like open market operations, changes in the discount rate can be harmful to and beneficial to the money supply and other fiscal aspects such as aggregate demand. As part of monetary policy action, the central bank can change the discount rate. If the bank lowers the discount rate, it means that the bank will pay a lower interest rate when borrowing from the Fed. If the interest rate is lower, it means the banks will save more money. They will borrow more money, and as a result, there will be more money in the system. As seen in the graph, an increase of money in the system is an increase in the money supply, or a rightward shift of the money supply curve. This rightward shift is a result of what I previously mentioned, the increase in loans, amount borrowed, and amount then loaned to individuals and businesses. It also results in a decrease in interest rates. If the Fed raises the discount rate, it has the opposite effect on the economy. By raising the discount rate, the interest rates at which the smaller banks borrow money will increase. This means that the banks will have to spend more on interest to be loaned money. It also means they will loan out less money to individuals and businesses, and subsequently decrease the money in the system. As seen in the graph, an increase in the discount rate would result in less money circulating throughout the economy, which is the same as a leftward shift or a decrease in the money supply curve and an increase in interest rates. Both these positive and negative aspects of the discount rate have direct correlations to changes in aggregate demand. Similar to open market operations, changes in the money supply due to changes in the discount rate directly correlate to aggregate demand. When decreasing the discount rate, the money in the system increases, resulting in an increase in investment and an increase in consumption. This change in several of the aspects of GDP result in a direct shift of the aggregate demand curve. As seen in the graph, the AD curve will increase and shift to the right. When increasing the discount rate, like I said before, the money supply decreases. This decrease in money supply results in a decrease in consumption and a decrease in investment, leading to an overall decrease in GDP and thus a decrease in aggregate demand. As seen in the graph, the AD curve shifts to the left to represent the decrease in GDP. The third and final monetary policy tool of the Fed is reserve requirements. Reserve requirements can be defined as the amount of money a bank needs to keep in vault or in the Federal Reserve Bank when a customer makes a deposit. The rest of the money from the deposit can then be loaned out. Reserve requirements are in terms of percentages of deposits. If the reserve requirement is 10% and I deposit $1,000 in the bank has to keep 100 of that and then can loan out the remaining 900. Then when that 900 is deposited, the bank has to keep 90 of it and can then loan out the 810 of it, and so on. The amount that the reserve requirement affects GDP can be found with the money multiplier. The money multiplier can be found with the equation 1 over the reserve requirement. So if the reserve is 10%, 1 over 0.10 equals 10. So the money multiplier is 10. So if you deposit $1,000 in the bank, it would increase GDP by $10,000. Simply put, if you kept loaning out that original $1,000, decreasing it by 10% each deposit in a different bank, by the end, you would have put $10,000 into the system. Because the reserve requirement has an impact on the amount of money in the system, changing the reserve requirement will also have an impact. If you increase the reserve requirement, say from 10% to 20%, your new multiplier is now 5 instead of 10. That means that your $1,000 will now only put $5,000 into the system. This means that there is less money resulting in less investments and less spending by consumers. As seen in the graph, the decrease in the money in the system results in a leftward shift of the money supply curve. Now, if you decrease the reserve requirement, say from 10 to 5%, the new money multiplier will be 20. This means that your original $1,000 will now put $20,000 into the system. This will directly result in more consumer spending and more investment. This increase of money in the system from the discount rate and from increases in spending results in an increase in the money supply and a shift to the right of the money supply curve as seen in the graph. Now, like the other two tools, the reserve requirement can also have a direct impact on aggregate demand. When the reserve requirement decreases, the money multiplier increases, meaning more money in the system, more loans, more consumption, and more investment. These increases are another way of saying that GDP increases, and because ADP represents GDP, aggregate demand also increases. This can be seen in the aggregate demand and aggregate supply graph as a shift of the AD curve to the right. When the reserve requirement is increased, the money multiplier decreases, meaning money deposited does not have as much of an impact on GDP. With a decrease in the multiplier, the initial deposits will not multiply to as much, investments will decrease, and consumer spending will also decrease. The decrease in these many aspects of GDP will result in a decrease in GDP, so also a decrease in aggregate demand. As seen in the graph, the aggregate demand curve will shift to the left.